The mysterious encounter. It was just another quiet evening when Jonathan sat in his small apartment, staring out the window. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the city. The soft hum of distant traffic filled the air, but for Jonathan, it felt like the world had stopped moving. He had always been a bit of a loner, preferring his own company to the chaos of the outside world. But that evening, something was different. There was a strange feeling in the air, something he couldn't explain. As he turned away from the window and walked towards the kitchen, there was a sudden, sharp knock at the door. Jonathan froze. He wasn't expecting anyone. His heart skipped a beat as he glanced at the clock. Just past 7. The knocking came again, louder this time. Who could it be at this hour? He thought, his curiosity growing. Slowly, Jonathan walked over to the door, his hand hovering over the doorknob. The knock came once more, insistent and urgent. Something about it made his instincts go on high alert, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had no choice but to open the door. After all, this was his apartment. With a deep breath, he turned the knob and opened the door. Standing on the other side was a woman, an unfamiliar woman with striking features that seemed both human and something else. Her long silver hair shimmered in the dim light, and her eyes, those eyes, were a deep shade of violet, like nothing he had ever seen before. She wore a dark, sleek outfit that seemed to blend into the night, and her posture was straight and commanding. There was an air of authority about her, but also something softer beneath it, something almost familiar. Jonathan blinked, his heart racing. He took a step back, unsure whether to trust his senses. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's gaze never wavered. "You can't have forgotten me, human," she said, her voice calm, but with an undeniable edge of urgency. Jonathan's mind raced. Forgotten her. He didn't recognize her at all. The way she spoke, though, with such certainty, made him feel like he should know exactly who she was. But there was nothing. No memory. Nothing. She tilted her head slightly, as if reading his thoughts. "I've been looking for you for a long time," she continued. "I never thought I would find you like this. After all this time, you've forgotten everything." Jonathan was confused, his thoughts tangled in a web of questions. "I'm sorry, I don't know who you are," he said, shaking his head. "I have no idea what you're talking about." The woman's expression softened just for a moment, her violet eyes filled with a mix of sadness and something else, something that almost looked like relief. She stepped forward, her presence filling the doorway. "You will remember," she said, her voice unwavering. "You will remember everything." Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine as her words echoed in his mind. He stepped back instinctively, unsure of what was happening, yet feeling drawn to her words. She had to be mistaken. There was no way he had forgotten someone who looked so unusual, and yet there was something undeniably familiar about her, something in the way she stood, the way her eyes studied him. It felt like she had been part of his life once, long ago. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. The woman didn't move, but her gaze never left his. Jonathan's heartbeat seemed to slow as he stared into her eyes, the deep violet pulling him in, almost hypnotic. His mind tried to resist, but something inside him, something he couldn't explain, urged him to trust her. Finally, he spoke, his voice more uncertain than before. "What do you want from me?" Her expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something urgent, something he couldn't place. "I've come to bring you back," she said. "You and I, we have unfinished business. The galaxy is at stake, and you're the only one who can help me." Jonathan frowned, still trying to piece together what was happening. A chill ran down his spine as he looked at her, unsure whether to believe her or slam the door in her face. His mind raced with questions, but there was one thought that stuck out above the rest. How could he help her if he didn't even remember her? "I don't understand," he said, his voice low. The woman seemed to sense his confusion, but her eyes were full of determination. "You will. But not now. For now, you need to trust me. You have no choice. Jonathan took a deep breath, his head spinning. Something deep inside him told him she was telling the truth, that her words were not to be taken lightly. Something about her, the way she spoke, the way she carried herself, made him feel like there was more to this encounter than a random stranger at his door. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. He didn't know who she was, or what she wanted, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. As he stood there, torn between fear and curiosity, the woman spoke again, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "We don't have much time, Jonathan. You can't forget me. You won't forget me." And with that, the door slammed shut behind him. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. His life was never going to be the same again. Flashbacks of the past. Jonathan sat on the couch, his mind still reeling from the encounter with the alien woman. The strange, sudden appearance of someone who seemed to know him, someone who claimed he had forgotten her, was a lot to process. The air in his apartment felt heavier now, as if it carried a weight that hadn't been there before. His heart raced, but he tried to calm himself. Was this some sort of joke? No. The look in her eyes, the way she spoke, it felt too real. He could still hear her words echoing in his head. "You can't have forgotten me, human." His hands shook slightly as he ran them through his hair, trying to clear the fog from his mind. What did she mean? Forgotten her. Suddenly, the room seemed to blur around him, and his thoughts began to slip away. Flashes of images, fragments of memories he couldn't fully understand, started flooding his mind. It was as if something inside him had been unlocked. He saw glimpses of a strange world, stars glowing in the distance, and her. The alien woman, but in a different place, a different time. She wasn't just standing at his door. No, she had been with him in this other world, on a distant planet. He saw them fighting together, side by side. There was an enemy, one that looked nothing like the humans he knew, tall, dark, and covered in strange metallic armor. Jonathan and the alien woman fought fiercely against the enemy, their weapons flashing in the dark sky as explosions rained down around them. But the memories were fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. He could remember their connection, the bond they shared, but it felt like the edges were blurry, out of reach. Jonathan closed his eyes, gripping the edge of the couch. "What is this?" he whispered to himself. He had no idea how to make sense of these sudden flashes. Why couldn't he remember more? Why did it feel so important? The woman's voice echoed in his mind again. "You will remember, Jonathan. You have to." His eyes snapped open. Was it her voice, or was it just his mind playing tricks on him? He could feel his pulse quicken. These memories, they were too vivid to ignore. They weren't just dreams. Something was real about them. Something was calling him, pushing him to remember. He stood up, pacing the room. The walls seemed to close in on him as his head spun. The flashes kept coming, one after the other. He saw her again. This time, they were not on a battlefield, but in a small, dimly lit room, facing each other. There was no fighting, no violence, only words. "You don't remember me, do you?" she asked softly. Her voice was almost sad, like she had been waiting a long time for him to come around. "I'm sorry," Jonathan whispered in the memory. He could feel the guilt in his chest, a weight that seemed to grow with every passing second. I don't remember." The memory faded, and Jonathan gasped as he stumbled back to the couch. His heart thudded in his chest, his breath coming out in sharp bursts. This couldn't be real. But it felt so real. Was it possible that he had known her all along? Was it possible that he had forgotten an entire chapter of his life? Suddenly, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. Jonathan jumped, startled by the interruption. He grabbed the phone, hoping it would distract him from the chaos in his mind. But when he looked at the screen, it wasn't a message or a call. It was a picture. A picture of him and the alien woman standing together, smiling, on the same strange world he had seen in his flashes. There was no denying it now. The picture was real as the memories, as real as the feeling that something was missing, something that had been taken from him. He stared at the photo, his mind racing. He had no memory of this moment, no memory of ever standing on this planet with her. But the proof was right there in front of him. A sudden sense of urgency washed over him. If this was real, then what else was real? What had he forgotten? What had she come back for? His thoughts were interrupted by another knock at the door. He froze. Could it be her again? Or someone else? Someone. Something. Else? He approached the door cautiously, his mind swirling with fear and confusion. He wasn't sure if he was ready for more answers, but deep down, he knew he couldn't run from this. He couldn't turn back now. Slowly, he opened the door. There she stood again. The alien woman, just as before. Her violet eyes met his with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "Did you remember?" she asked, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. Jonathan took a deep breath, his mind spinning. He had so many questions, but the one that mattered the most slipped out before he could stop it. "Why did you leave me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman's expression shifted, sadness flickering across her face. She took a step forward, her presence overpowering. "I never wanted to leave you, Jonathan," she said softly. "But I had no choice. The galaxy needed you, and I had to make sure you were safe." The revelation of their connection. Jonathan stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the alien woman. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything he had just experienced. The photo, the memories, the flashes of a past that seemed so far away, but somehow familiar. He felt as if he were teetering on the edge of something enormous, something he couldn't fully grasp. The woman didn't say anything immediately. She just stood there, her violet eyes locked onto his, as if she was waiting for him to say something. Her expression softened, and for the first time, Jonathan noticed how vulnerable she seemed. She wasn't just a stranger at his door. She was someone he had once known, someone who had shared something important with him. You said I've forgotten you," Jonathan finally managed to say, his voice rough. "But I don't remember anything. Not like this." Her face tightened with a mixture of sadness and frustration. "I know it's hard for you, Jonathan, but you have to understand. What I'm about to tell you, it's the truth. We were connected once, in a way you can't imagine. A bond that tied us together across galaxies." He blinked, unable to process her words. "A bond? I don't." "You were more than just a human soldier," she interrupted gently. "You were my partner. We fought side by side, not just for survival, but for something much bigger. We had a mission together." Jonathan's mind reeled. Partner? Mission? He had no memory of any of it. He had always thought of himself as a regular person, living a regular life. The idea that he could have been part of something so much larger, so far beyond his understanding, was almost impossible to accept. "I don't know what you mean," he said quietly, feeling the weight of her words pushing against his chest. I'm just a regular guy. I don't understand." The alien woman's expression softened even further, and she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. The contact sent a jolt of energy through him, a feeling that was both comforting and unsettling at the same time. "Jonathan, you are not just a regular human. You are one of the last of your kind to possess something unique, a power that makes you invaluable. When we first met, I saw potential in you. You were someone who could change the course of history, but the accident, it erased everything." He frowned, trying to follow her words. "The accident?" The woman nodded, her eyes darkening. "Yes. During one of our missions, something went terribly wrong. We were attacked, overrun by the enemy. You were injured, and I had to make a choice. To protect you, to keep you safe, I had to erase your memories. I sent you away, hoping you could heal, that you could return to a normal life. Jonathan's chest tightened as her words sank in. He had always felt like something was missing, like there was a part of him that didn't quite fit into his life. The memories, the flashes he had seen, weren't just random thoughts. They were pieces of a bigger picture. You erased my memories, he repeated, his voice barely audible. She nodded again. I had to. The enemy we fought wasn't just any enemy. They were ruthless, and they would have used your abilities to destroy everything. The power within you is dangerous, Jonathan. It's the reason why they hunted us, why they wanted to take you. I thought keeping you hidden would keep you safe. He stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. His thoughts were a storm of confusion, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was true. There was a part of him that recognized her. Something in his heart, something deep inside, told him that what she was saying wasn't a lie. But why come back now? He asked, still struggling to understand. Why now, after all this time? Her face hardened, her eyes flashing with urgency. Because they found you again, Jonathan. They never stopped looking for you. And now, with the galaxy in chaos, the power you hold is more important than ever. He shook his head, trying to grasp the enormity of it all. What power? What are you talking about? The woman took a step back, her gaze hardening. The power that you possess is not something you were born with. It's something you were chosen for. You were genetically altered, enhanced. You have the ability to tap into a form of energy that no one else can. Energy that can change the course of wars. Energy that can destroy civilizations. Jonathan felt the weight of her words press against him like a heavy stone. The idea that he had the power to shape the fate of entire worlds was terrifying. But even more terrifying was the fact that he had no memory of it. No memory of ever being someone special. But I don't feel any different, he muttered. I don't feel powerful. I don't feel like I can destroy anything. The woman's gaze softened once more, and she stepped closer. That's because the power is dormant. You haven't unlocked it yet, but it's inside you, Jonathan. It's in your blood, in your mind, waiting to be awakened. That's why I'm here. To help you remember. To help you unlock what's inside. Jonathan swallowed hard. He was no longer sure of what was real and what wasn't. His entire life, the life he had known, seemed to crumble away with every word she spoke. His identity, his past, everything he thought he understood about himself was being torn apart and replaced with something otherworldly. I don't know if I can do this, he said, his voice shaking. I don't know if I can remember all of it. You will, the alien woman replied, her voice steady and confident. But it won't be easy. You'll face challenges, enemies you can't even imagine. But I'll be with you every step of the way. You're not alone in this, Jonathan. For the first time, Jonathan felt a glimmer of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and confusion. But he wasn't alone. Maybe, just maybe, he could face whatever was coming, and perhaps even unlock the power that had been hidden inside him for so long. The threat they face. Jonathan stood silently, his mind racing, still trying to process everything the alien woman had just revealed. It felt like his entire world had shifted in an instant. From being an ordinary man leading a quiet life to being thrust into a galactic struggle where he held a power that could change the fate of entire civilizations. The weight of it was overwhelming. The alien woman, who had introduced herself as Ilara, seemed to sense his inner turmoil. She watched him carefully, her violet eyes filled with a mixture of concern and determination. We don't have much time, she said, her voice breaking through his haze of thoughts. They're coming for you, Jonathan. The enemy knows you're here. They've been searching for you for years, and now they're closer than ever. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. Who are they? What do they want with me? Ilara's expression darkened as she stepped closer, her voice lowering to a whisper. They are the Viren, an ancient race bent on controlling the galaxy. They hunt for those with abilities like yours. The power you possess is more than just a weapon. It's the key to their domination. Once they control it, they will crush anyone who stands in their way. Jonathan felt a chill creep up his spine. The Viren sounded like nothing he had ever encountered. The thought that there were beings out there, willing to destroy everything for power, made him feel small and helpless. But Ilara's words, the urgency in her voice, made it clear that he was no longer just a bystander. He was in the middle of something far greater than himself. "But why would they want me?" Jonathan asked, his voice shaky. "I don't even know how to control this power you're talking about. I don't even know what it is." "They want to harness it, Jonathan, to make you one of their own." Ilara's gaze was intense, her voice filled with an unspoken truth. "You are the last of your kind, the last of those who were genetically altered to wield this energy. And if they find you, they will stop at nothing to take it, to use you as a tool in their war for control." Jonathan swallowed hard, his mind spinning. "But I don't even remember what happened to me. I can't fight them if I don't even know how to fight." Ilara's eyes softened, and for a moment, she placed a hand on his arm in a reassuring gesture. "You don't need to fight them with brute strength. Your power isn't about violence. It's about control. You have the ability to manipulate the energy that flows within you, but you need to learn to unlock it, to awaken it." Jonathan shook his head, still feeling lost. "How do I even begin to do that? I'm not like you. I don't have years of training. I don't know anything about this kind of power." Ilara stepped back, her eyes scanning the room as though she were weighing her options. "We'll start with the basics. I'll teach you what I can, but time is against us. The Viren are relentless. They never stop hunting, and they won't give up until they have you." Jonathan's mind raced as he tried to grasp everything Ilara was telling him. The Viren, the power within him, the war that had been raging long before he even knew it existed. A sudden thought hit him like a bolt of lightning. If they're coming for me, are they already here? Are they already on Earth? Ilara's face tightened with fear. "No, not yet. But they're close. They've already infiltrated the galaxy's network, and they'll track us down soon. We can't stay here much longer." She turned, her eyes scanning the room once more before meeting his gaze again. "We have to leave. Now." Jonathan's pulse quickened. The idea of leaving everything behind, his home, his life, was terrifying. But the thought of staying and waiting for the Viren to find him was even worse. "I don't know where to go," he admitted, his voice shaky. Ilara didn't hesitate. "I do. There's a place, hidden, far from the Viren's reach. But it won't stay hidden for long. We have to move quickly. If we stay here, they'll find us. And when they do, there's no telling what they'll do to you." Jonathan nodded slowly, a sense of resolve settling over him. He didn't know what he was about to face or how he was supposed to fight back. But one thing was clear. He couldn't do this alone. He had to trust Ilara, and he had to face whatever was coming. Ilara gave him a small nod of approval. "Good. We leave now." Before Jonathan could ask any more questions, Ilara turned and moved toward the window, glancing outside. Her expression grew tense, and she motioned for him to follow. Jonathan hesitated for a moment, looking back at his apartment, the place he had always called home, and then followed her. As they stepped into the hallway, Ilara turned to him, her voice urgent. "We don't have much time. You need to understand, Jonathan. The Viren aren't just coming for you. They're coming for everything. If we don't stop them, everything you've ever known will be destroyed. The entire galaxy will fall under their control." Jonathan swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. The future of the galaxy, the safety of countless lives, rested on his shoulders, and he didn't even know how to use the power inside him. As they made their way down the darkened hallway, Jonathan couldn't help but wonder. Could he rise to the challenge? Could he unlock the power within him and stop the Viren before it was too late? The tension in the air was thick, and Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on them. The Viren were coming, and the only question left was whether or not he could be ready in time. The protagonists struggle. Jonathan's mind buzzed with uncertainty as they made their way through the dimly lit streets. The weight of the information Ilara had dropped on him felt suffocating. He had always lived a quiet, uneventful life, never once thinking he would be caught up in a galactic conflict. Now, everything had changed. The Viren were hunting him, and according to Ilara, he had powers that could either save or destroy everything. His heart pounded in his chest as they reached a secluded alleyway. Ilara led him swiftly, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. She moved with purpose, and he struggled to keep up. She seemed to know exactly where they were going, but Jonathan felt lost. How could he possibly have the power to stop the Viren? How could someone like him, someone who had no memory of his past, be the key to saving the galaxy? As they reached the end of the alley, Ilara turned to him, her face serious. "We're almost there, but we need to talk." Jonathan glanced around nervously. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Viren were out there somewhere. He didn't know how they operated, but everything Ilara had said about them seemed to suggest that no one could escape their reach for long. "I'm listening," Jonathan said, trying to steady his voice. The fear in his chest was palpable, but he refused to let it control him. Ilara hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice quieter now. "I need you to understand something, Jonathan. This power you have, it's not just a tool. It's not something you can use casually or without consequence. It's tied to who you are, to your very essence. And if you misuse it, there will be consequences, not just for you, but for everyone you care about." Jonathan frowned, his chest tightening. "What do you mean?" She locked eyes with him, her gaze steady but filled with a weight of responsibility. "This power is dangerous. It can change the course of entire worlds, but it can also destroy them. The Viren know this. They want it because they can use it to bend reality itself, to control time and space. If they get their hands on you, they'll have everything they need to conquer the galaxy. But if you can't learn to control it, they'll destroy you and anyone who stands in their way." Jonathan's throat went dry as Ilara's words stank in. He had never considered himself a hero. He was just a man trying to live his life. But now he was being told that he had the power to either save or doom everything. "I'm not ready for this," Jonathan admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know how to control any of this." Ilara's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly comforting. "I know this is overwhelming, but you're not alone. I'll help you. We'll train, and I'll teach you what I can. But you need to trust me, Jonathan. You need to trust in yourself." Jonathan looked at her, a feeling of uncertainty swirling in his chest. He didn't trust himself. How could he, when he didn't even know who he was anymore? His memories were fragmented, pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. The person he had been, the ordinary man who lived a normal life, seemed so distant now. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered, looking down at the ground. "I'm not like you. I don't have the skills. I don't even know what's inside me." Ilara stepped closer, her voice firm, but reassuring. "You have more strength than you realize, Jonathan. It's not about strength in the way you think. It's about finding balance, about learning to harness what's inside you without letting it control you." Jonathan felt a surge of frustration building in his chest. "I don't even remember what's inside me. How am I supposed to trust in something I can't even remember?" She met his gaze with a quiet intensity, her eyes filled with both sadness and resolve. "You will remember, but right now we need to focus on what's in front of us. The Viren are closing in. We don't have time for you to doubt yourself." Jonathan took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him. The reality of the situation was undeniable. The Viren were coming, and he didn't know if he could unlock the power that was supposed to save them. "I'm scared," he admitted, looking up at her with a mix of fear and determination. "But I don't want to let anyone down. Not you, not the galaxy. I don't want to run from this." Ilara gave him a small, approving nod. "Good. That's the first step. Fear is natural, Jonathan. It's what you do with that fear that matters. You've already started. You've already made the choice not to run. Now we begin." Before Jonathan could ask what would come next, Ilara motioned for him to follow. They continued down the alley, emerging onto a quiet street that looked more like an abandoned industrial area. Jonathan's heart still raced, his mind torn between fear and a strange, growing sense of resolve. He didn't know how long they had before the Viren would find them, but one thing was certain. He couldn't keep running. He had to face this head-on. As they walked in silence, Jonathan's thoughts turned inward. He couldn't remember much of his past, but Ilara was right about one thing. He couldn't let his fear hold him back. The power within him was his only chance. If he wanted to survive, if he wanted to protect everything he cared about, he would have to learn how to use it. And time was running out. The final battle begins. Jonathan's heart raced as Ilara led him through the deserted streets. The city seemed quieter than ever, almost too quiet. The only sound was their hurried footsteps echoing off the cold pavement. Jonathan could feel the weight of time pressing on him, the looming danger growing with every passing second. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he knew that his life, and the future of countless others, depended on what he could do next. "We're almost there," Ilara said, her voice low but urgent. She turned to him, her violet eyes filled with intensity. "The Viren are closing in. We need to get to the safe house, and we need to do it quickly." Jonathan nodded, the gravity of the situation settling in. He had never felt so unprepared in his life. The weight of his past, his forgotten abilities, his lost memories, was heavy on his shoulders. Every step he took, every decision he made, felt like it could tip the balance between life and death. But there was no turning back. He had made the choice to fight, and now he had to see it through. Suddenly, Ilara stopped in her tracks, holding up a hand to signal for Jonathan to do the same. Her eyes scanned the street, and Jonathan instinctively followed her gaze, scanning the shadows. His pulse quickened. He didn't know what she had sensed, but he knew it couldn't be good. "We've been followed," Ilara whispered, her voice tense. "Stay close." Jonathan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He couldn't see anyone, but he could feel the presence of something, or someone, watching them from the darkness. It was as if the air itself had thickened, and the space around them felt charged with a dangerous energy. "I don't see anyone," Jonathan muttered, his voice low. "How do you know?" Ilara's gaze remained fixed on the shadows ahead. "They'd been tracking us for days. They've learned to move undetected. We won't see them until it's too late." Jonathan swallowed hard, his mind racing. He could feel the power inside him, the energy Ilara had spoken of, pulsing faintly at the edges of his consciousness. It was there, somewhere deep within, but it felt elusive, like a dream he couldn't quite remember. Suddenly, the air shifted. A strange vibration ran through the ground, and before Jonathan could react, the streetlights flickered, casting long, ominous shadows across the pavement. A figure emerged from the darkness, a tall, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. The Viren. Ilara stepped forward, positioning herself between Jonathan and the approaching threat. "Stay back, Jonathan," she ordered, her voice sharp. "You're not ready." But Jonathan could feel it now. The power that had been dormant for so long was awakening. It surged inside him like a tide, a burning energy he had never felt before. It was strange, yet strangely familiar, as if it had always been there, waiting for him to unlock it. He wasn't sure how to control it, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let Ilara fight this battle alone. "No," Jonathan said, his voice steady with newfound resolve. "I'm ready." The Viren figure stepped forward, its red eyes gleaming with malice. "You think you're ready, human?" The voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Jonathan felt the energy within him stir, as if reacting to the presence of the enemy. His heartbeat quickened, and he felt a pull in his chest, like a magnet drawing him toward the figure. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew he couldn't hesitate. Ilara glanced at him, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and approval. "Remember what I told you," she said softly. "Focus." With a deep breath, Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment, trying to center himself. He could feel the power now, thrumming in his veins, calling to him. It was almost as if the universe itself was giving him a choice, to control it or to be consumed by it. His eyes snapped open, and he focused all of his energy on the Viren. With a sudden, explosive force, a wave of light erupted from him, slamming into the enemy with a violent shockwave. The Viren staggered back, its eyes widening in surprise. Jonathan's breath came in ragged gasps. The energy, his energy, had just done something he couldn't have imagined. He had tapped into something far greater than anything he had known, and for a brief moment, it felt like he had control. But then, the Viren regained its balance, a sinister grin spreading across its face. "Impressive," the Viren murmured. "But it's not enough." Before Jonathan could react, the Viren charged, moving with inhuman speed. Ilara stepped forward, intercepting the blow with a flash of her own power. A burst of energy collided between them, creating a shockwave that knocked Jonathan off his feet. He hit the ground hard, his head spinning. "Stay focused, Jonathan," Ilara shouted as she engaged the Viren. The two moved like shadows, striking and dodging with incredible speed. Jonathan could barely keep up, his mind still reeling from the wave of power he had unleashed. But something within him had shifted. The energy inside him wasn't gone, it was still there, waiting. Jonathan gritted his teeth, pushing himself to his feet. He couldn't let Ilara do all the work. He closed his eyes again, letting the power flow through him, centering it in his chest. He focused on the Viren, the enemy that threatened to destroy everything, and he reached deep within himself to draw on that power once more. This time, it didn't feel as foreign. It felt like it was a part of him, something he could control, something he could shape. With a yell, Jonathan unleashed another surge of energy, this one more focused and powerful than before. It hit the Viren with a force that sent the creature flying back, crashing into a nearby building. Ilara turned, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Jonathan, you did it." Jonathan looked at his hands, trembling with the aftershock of the power. His heart pounded, but there was no time to celebrate. The Viren wasn't finished. "You're just getting started," Ilara said grimly, her eyes scanning the horizon. "This is only the beginning." Jonathan nodded, his mind made up. The battle was far from over, and he had just unlocked the first step of his true potential. But one thing was clear. No matter what happened, he wasn't going to stop fighting. A new beginning. The battle had only just begun. Jonathan stood in the midst of the chaos, his heart still pounding in his chest. The power he had unleashed was still coursing through his veins, a force he hadn't fully understood until now. Ilara stood beside him, her presence a steadying force in the madness that surrounded them. The Viren, though temporarily pushed back, were regrouping. Jonathan could feel their relentless pursuit in every second of silence between the clashes. They weren't going to stop until they had him, until they had control of the power within him. "Jonathan," Ilara said, her voice sharp and focused, "this isn't just about fighting them. It's about protecting everything. The Viren's reach extends beyond just this planet. Their influence is everywhere. If we don't stop them here, if we don't act now, they'll destroy everything we fought for. Everything." Jonathan's breath came in sharp gasps as he tried to wrap his mind around her words. It was too much for him to understand in one moment. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for the galaxy, for everything that had been lost, for everything that could still be saved. But what can I do? How do we stop them? Jonathan asked, his voice filled with uncertainty, despite the surge of power within him. I don't know how to control it. I don't even know if I can. Ilara's violet eyes softened for just a moment, but there was no time for comfort. You will learn. You're learning already. You did something back there, something you couldn't even have imagined before. You have the power inside you to stop them. It's not about defeating them with strength alone. It's about using what you've unlocked, what you are. The key isn't in violence. It's in control. Balance. Jonathan looked at her, his mind still unclear, but something within him was beginning to solidify. He couldn't let fear, doubt, or confusion hold him back. The Viren were counting on him to be weak, to falter in the face of the unknown. But he couldn't afford to be that person anymore. He wasn't just Jonathan, the ordinary man. He was something more. As Ilara continued to lead him through the broken streets, the sounds of the Viren forces moving in grew louder. There was no more time for hesitation. Jonathan's thoughts flashed back to his forgotten memories, the flashes of the past he had seen in pieces, the moments of battle with Ilara by his side. They had been allies once, partners in something bigger than either of them. The connection between them was undeniable, and now it was his turn to step up and fight for that bond, for that purpose. We need to get to the heart of their base, Ilara said, her voice filled with urgency. That's where their command center is. If we can shut it down, we can disrupt their entire operation. We'll have a fighting chance. Jonathan nodded, his determination growing. Let's do it. They moved swiftly, avoiding patrols and sticking to the shadows as they made their way deeper into enemy territory. The air was thick with the hum of distant technology, the low rumble of engines and machinery filling the space. The closer they got to the heart of the Viren base, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Jonathan could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Finally, they reached a towering structure, an imposing building that stood at the center of the enemy base. The walls were lined with strange, alien technology that pulsed with a sickly light. It was a stark reminder of how far the Viren had advanced and how much they had taken from the galaxy. This is it, Ilara said quietly. We have to get inside. Once we do, you'll have to use everything you've learned, everything you've unlocked. Jonathan's pulse quickened. He was about to face the Viren at the heart of their operations, and the future of everything hung in the balance. He had no idea if he was ready, but there was no turning back. As they infiltrated the building, the halls were eerily quiet. The faint sounds of distant machinery echoed through the corridors, but there were no Viren soldiers in sight. Jonathan couldn't help but wonder if this was a trap, if they were walking into an ambush. But there was no time to question it. They had to act now. Ilara led him to a large fortified door at the end of the hallway. The security systems had been disabled, likely through the efforts of a resistance faction. Ilara didn't hesitate. She placed her hand on the door's console, and it slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the heart of the Viren operation lay before them, a massive control center, filled with screens showing the movements of their forces across the galaxy. The Viren had plans, and they weren't just targeting Earth. They were targeting the entire galaxy. Jonathan felt the power within him stir once more. It was stronger now, more defined, and it thrummed with urgency. Ilara turned to him, her expression steady. This is it. You can do this, Jonathan. You have the power to stop them. But it's up to you. Jonathan nodded, his breath steady. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a fight for everything. For the galaxy. For Ilara. For the future. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, the power inside him swelling. The energy swirled around him, an untamed force that was ready to be controlled. It was his choice now, his decision whether to use that power to save or destroy. As the Viren command center hummed with its dark energy, Jonathan raised his hands, and with a single focused motion, he unleashed the full force of his power. The building trembled as the energy radiated outward, crashing into the control systems and causing sparks to fly. Screens shattered, alarms blared, and the entire structure seemed to shake under the force of his will. Ilara watched, her expression unreadable, as the building around them began to crumble. The Viren were no longer in control. Jonathan had taken back the power, and with it, he had changed everything. As the last of the Viren's hold on the facility faded, Jonathan collapsed to his knees, his body exhausted from the strain. Ilara was beside him in an instant, her hand steadying him. "You did it," she said softly. "You saved us all." Jonathan looked up at her, a sense of relief washing over him. For the first time, he didn't feel like the ordinary man who had no place in this galaxy. He had fought back, he had unlocked his true potential, and he had made the choice to protect everything that mattered. "We did it," he replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Together." As they stood there amidst the wreckage, the galaxy still uncertain but now with a fighting chance, Jonathan realized that this was just the beginning. There would be more battles, more challenges to face, but he was no longer afraid. He had found his place in the universe, and now, with Ilara by his side, they would fight to make sure the galaxy had a future worth fighting for.